Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 14. Yavan na jayeta paravari asmin vishveshware drashtari bhakti yoga tavat staviya purushasya rupam kriyavasane prayata smarita yavanna jayeta paravaresmin yavanna jayeta paravaresmin Vishveshwara Jastari Bhakti Yoga Vishveshwara Jastari Bhakti Yoga Tavat Staviya Purushasya Rupam Tavat Staviya Purushasya Rupam Kriya Vasane Prayanta Smareta Kriya Vasane Prayata Smareta Yavanna Jayeta Paravaresmin Vishveshware Jashtari Bhakti Yoga Tavat Staviya Purushasya Rupam Kriya Vasane Prayata Smareta Yavat as long as Na does not Jayeta develop Para transcendental Avari mundane Asmin in this form of Vishva Ishvare the Lord of all worlds Jashtari unto the seer Bhakti Yoga devotional service Tavat so long Staviya the gross materialist Purushasya of the Virat Purusha Rupam universal form Kriya Avasane at the end of one's prescribed duties Prayata with proper attention Smarita one should remember. Translation: unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord, the seer of both the transcendental and material worlds, he should remember or meditate upon the universal form of the Lord at the end of his prescribed duties. Again, unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord, the seer of both the transcendental and material worlds, he should remember or meditate upon the universal form of the Lord at the end of his prescribed duties. Before I read the purport, I have a quick question. The other day I was approached, I can't remember, was it Sankirtan or was it Nit? About this morning. Was it you? To speak about something about today, about some devotees who are going out.
Oh, yeah,
I just want to know, is that really relevant to many people in this assembly right now?
Yeah, I mean, after after Bhagavatam class, we were planning to have breakfast and then chant the Brahma Samhita, and then go out for 2 hours book distribution.
Okay, I just want to know how many people is that relevant to in this assembly? Okay. Okay, because I just wanted to check. I wanted to make sure I don't neglect your requests, but at the same time I wanted to know how much emphasis I should place in this class and specifically addressing the points that you wanted me to speak about. So I think I'll try to cover both the essence of this verse and to speak a little bit about what you were hoping to get from me in terms of inspiration for today's events. All right? Purport. The Supreme Lord is the seer of all worlds. Is there echo?
I don't know why that's echoing. Try to clear that. Go ahead.
The Supreme Lord is the seer of all worlds, both material, transcendental. In other words, still there, huh?
Yeah.
Sounds like it's a voice descending from the heavens. Something you'd use in a drama to create that impression. Believe me, my feet are both very much on the ground. I have no place beyond this physical, burdensome material world. Try to bring me back where I belong. You got it?
I don't really know how, which
I see.
which one controls it, so I have to experiment.
Hare Krishna. Okay, I think you got it.
You got it.
All right. The Supreme Lord is the seer of all worlds, both material and transcendental. In other words, the Supreme Lord is the ultimate beneficiary and enjoyer of all worlds, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 5:29. The spiritual world is the manifestation of his internal potency, and the material world is the manifestation of his external potency. The living entities are also his marginal potency, and by their own choice they can live in either the transcendental or material worlds. The material world is not a fit place for living entities, because they are spiritually one with the Lord, and in the material world the living entities become conditioned by the laws of the material world. The Lord wants all living entities who are his parts and parcels to live with him in the transcendental world, and for enlightening conditioned souls in the material world, all the Vedas and the revealed scriptures are there expressly to recall the conditioned souls back home, back to Godhead. Unfortunately, the conditioned living entities, although suffering continually the threefold miseries of conditioned life, are not very serious about going back to Godhead. It is due to their misguided way of living, complicated by sins and virtues. Some of them who are virtuous by deeds begin to re-establish the lost relation with the Lord, but they are unable to understand the personal feature of the Lord. The real purpose of life is to make contact with the Lord and be engaged in his service. That is the natural position of living entities. But those who are impersonalists and are unable to render any loving service to the Lord have been advised to meditate upon his impersonal feature, the Virat Rupa or universal form. Some way or other one must try to re-establish one's forgotten relation with the Lord if one at all desires to gain real happiness in life and to reclaim his natural, unfettered condition. For the less intelligent beginners, meditation on the impersonal feature, the Virat Rupa or universal form of the Lord, will gradually qualify one to rise to personal contact. One is advised herewith to meditate upon the Virat Rupa specified in the previous chapters in order to understand how the different planets, seas, mountains, rivers, birds, beasts, human beings, demigods, and all that we can conceive are but different parts and limbs of the Lord's Virat form. This sort of thinking is also a type of meditation on the absolute truth, and as soon as such meditation begins, one develops one's godly qualities, and the whole world appears to be a happy and peaceful residence for all the people of the world. Without such meditation on God, either personal or impersonal, all good qualities of the human being become covered with misconceptions regarding his constitutional position, and without such advanced knowledge, the whole world becomes a hell for the human being. Unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord, the seer of both the transcendental and material worlds, he should remember or meditate upon the universal form of the Lord at the end of his prescribed duties. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksho Unmanitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Nangayate Garim Yat Kripa Tamaham Vande Shri Gurundina Taranam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvashesha Sanyavari Pasta Chade Satarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this verse from Srimad Bhagavatam is speaking about the necessity of developing a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada, in his commentary, he emphasizes this necessity in terms of rendering service to the Lord as the ultimate culmination of fruit of all of one's endeavors in life. There's nothing higher to be achieved than the opportunity to come in contact with the Lord through service to Him. Therefore, all the injunctions of the Vedas are ultimately meant to culminate in devotional service to the Lord. Lord Chaitanya, when he was speaking to Devananda Pandit, who was a reciter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, who was austere, with many so-called virtues which are talked about here in the commentary. But nonetheless, Devananda Pandit did not fully understand that every word, every verse, beginning, middle, and end of the Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to be used to, or spoken about to glorify devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because that is what the Srimad Bhagavatam is. It is the glorification of the Lord. And it is the glorification of the devotees of the Lord who are dedicated their lives to rendering service and to pleasing the senses of the Supreme Lord. So, here we see in the verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam where it seems to be concession is being made for meditation upon the impersonal aspect of the Lord, or the Virat Rupa. But the verse specifically speaks that unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord. So we can understand that the verse itself leads to establishing the importance of devotional service above everything else. If one has the opportunity to come in contact with devotional service, then what necessity is there to meditate upon the impersonal Virat Rupa of the Lord? Yeah. Therefore, for those who can't, or who have not come in contact with devotional service, who have not come in contact with the devotee of the Lord, for those who have not come in contact with the merciful form of the Lord, the form of the Archa Vigraha, a form which is much more attractive than the Virat Rupa, which is much more easily, the Archa Vigraha, which is much more attractive and much more easily able to meditate upon. If one has not come in contact with the Lord in the form, transcendental form of His holy name, by which one can actually, by meditating upon the holy name in the mood of prayerful service, one can actually make direct contact with the personality of the Supreme Lord. Then, for those who have not had that fortune, which is a word which is oftentimes used in respect to devotional service, that one achieves it by good fortune. But if one has not had that good fortune, then one should try to meditate upon this Virat Rupa, seeing the mountains, the rivers, the seas, and all the different manifestations of this cosmic manifestation, to see it in terms of the body of the Lord and to meditate in this way. Obviously, it is not a prescribed method for one who is a sadhaka or for one who is practicing the ninefold process of devotional service. This is not required to be our meditation. So, therefore, taking into account what we've already said about the importance of understanding Srimad Bhagavatam in terms of its essence, with respect to Lord Chaitanya's instructions to how Srimad Bhagavatam should be presented. And the reason why Lord Chaitanya spoke to Devananda Pandit in this way is because Devananda Pandit, he was speaking Srimad Bhagavatam, but from an impersonalist conception. And he also was not able to recognize in the assembly, one time when he was speaking, Srivas Thakur, hearing the topics of the Supreme Lord, he began internally meditating upon the Lord as a true Vaishnava, absorbed in thought of the Lord, absorbed in the pastimes of the Lord, and absorbed in the form of the Lord. He began to cry, was experiencing spiritual emotions, even though, of course, the speaker was not speaking in a way to evoke such emotions in the heart of the hearer. Nonetheless, Srivas Thakur, meditating internally on the real message of Srimad Bhagavatam, knowing its essence is loving devotional service to Krishna, he began experiencing these spiritual emotions and began crying. So, the followers of Devananda Pandit who were sitting in that assembly, hearing his recitation of Bhagavatam, they considered Srivas Thakur to be a disturbance. They weren't able to recognize his exalted platform of devotional service. They physically picked him up and removed him from that assembly, considering him to be a disturbance to the speaker of the Bhagavatam. Now, of course, Srivas Thakur was genuinely on that platform. And it is not that one, as unfortunately I have had the opportunity to experience, before one should imitate such spiritual emotions. Srivas Thakur simply just became lost in his spiritual emotions. And Devananda Pandit, and when he saw his followers carrying Srivas Thakur out of the assembly, he didn't say anything. And therefore he was wrong. He offended Srivas Thakur. Devananda Pandit should have actually gotten down from his seat and offered obeisances to Srivas Thakur upon recognition of his exalted position. But instead, he did not say anything, and he allowed Srivas Thakur to be removed. So he had offended Srivas Thakur, and Lord Chaitanya was very angry, and he wanted to punish. And at a later point in time, he wanted to punish Devananda Pandit for his offenses to such a great exalted Vaishnava. Devananda Pandit later realized his offense. He fell down before the Lord, begged forgiveness, and asked him the Lord to please instruct him on devotional service to the Lord, and to instruct him how he should speak Srimad Bhagavatam. And it was at that time that Lord Chaitanya explained to Devananda Pandit, whenever you speak from Srimad Bhagavatam, when you speak from the beginning, middle, end, it's all meant to glorify devotional service to the Supreme Lord. And therefore, Srimad Bhagavatam is Srila Vyasadev's commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, and his commentary was meant to exclusively glorify the virtues of devotional service to the Lord, culminating in the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Lord in this transcendental realm of Goloka Vrindavan, and giving a very detailed description of the form, the qualities, the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and it is a glorification of His name as well, which is also spoken about throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam. Name, form, qualities, and pastimes. Srila Narada Muni instructed Vyasadeva to render the Srimad Bhagavatam and to give his commentary in the Vedanta Sutra in such a way that the Supreme Lord would be glorified, devotional service would be glorified, so that anyone who hears the message of Srimad Bhagavatam from beginning to end will be able to realize the glories of the Supreme Lord and will surrender his life to devotional service. Narada Muni, when instructing Vyasadeva, he says that by glorifying these pastimes, qualities, form of the Supreme Lord in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in this commentary, you've already explained the Vedanta Sutra, you've explained the Mahabharata, you explained the four Vedas, but people in this age of Kali, they will accept these concessions to be the ultimate principles of life, and you have not given them the essence. Therefore, please, and that is why you're feeling, that's why you're lamenting, that is why you're feeling unfulfilled despite giving so many Vedic literatures, because you have not given the essence of all Vedic literatures, which is to glorify devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So, when Narada Muni instructed Vyasa in this way, he explained many verses, but important verses we quoted the other day, is that one may forsake his material occupation to engage in devotional service of the Lord. One who forsakes his material occupation to engage in a devotional service of the Lord, he may fall down in an immature stage, but there is never any danger of his being unsuccessful. On the other hand, a non-devotee, even though perfectly engaged in his occupational activities, does not gain anything. My dear Vyas, even though a devotee of Lord Krishna may sometimes fall down somehow or other, he certainly does not become a fruitive worker again, because anyone who has once relished the taste of the lotus feet of the Lord will never be able to do anything but remember that ecstasy again and again and again. Narada Muni instructed Vyas to glorify devotional service so that people can come in contact with devotional service by coming in contact with Srimad Bhagavatam, and even become inclined to forsake their material occupation so that they can render service to the lotus feet of the Lord. So there's never any danger of his being unsuccessful. If at any point in his life he realizes the glories, the importance of devotional service. The sages of Naimisharanya, they also asked, what is that supreme occupation for all mankind? Savai pung samparo damo yato bhaktir dhoksache ahaitukya pratihata yuyatma supasidati. The supreme occupation for all mankind is that by which one can render loving devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted in order to completely satisfy the self. Ahaitukya pratihata. So this is the supreme occupation for all mankind. A supreme duty. We gave the example the other day. We were telling how we were listening to Srila Prabhupada's lecture in 1968, and he was talking about Dharma, and he said that this word Dharma, we cannot translate it as religion. He said in his lecture, he was explaining, we have purposely not used the word religion to translate as a translation for this word Dharma. It is not a sufficient English equivalent for the word Dharma. And he explained his reason for not doing it. He says, because according to the English definition and translation in the dictionary of religion, religion means a type of faith. And Prabhupada said, faith can change. And he said, one day I may be thinking that I am Hindu, but the next day I may think I'm a Muslim, or I may be a Muslim, next day I think I'm Hindu, or Hindu, and then I think I'm Christian. So faith can change. So religion is an inadequate translation for Dharma. And therefore Prabhupada says, I have chose to therefore use the word here in this particular reference that he was speaking from, which is one's ultimate duty. That which must be performed, and then he explains it's that inherent quality of the spirit soul which can never be taken away, and he used that simple example that we always use. It's just as the inherent quality of fire is heat and light. If you take heat and light away from fire, then it is no longer fire. So the inherent quality of the living being is to serve. Serve he must do. So what is if he's engaged in his ordinary occupational duties, then he's engaged in service to society. He's rendering service to society, he's rendering service to family, to friends. That is his occupational duty. But that's not Paro Dharma. That is not the highest Dharma. The highest Dharma is that innate propensity to render service must be aimed at satisfying the person, personality, satisfying the desires, satisfying the senses of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna himself. And therefore Srimad Bhagavatam has elaborated upon and spoken for this purpose in mind, to give the living entity an opportunity to come in contact with devotional service. And when the message of Srimad Bhagavatam is spoken, glorifying devotional service, then anyone who comes in contact and hears that should really think and understand, yes, devotional service is the ultimate service. It is the ultimate goal, it's the ultimate objective for every living being. Now having come in contact by hearing this transcendental message of Srimad Bhagavatam from a devotee of the Lord, I must, and it's meant to awaken that desire which is there within the heart, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema, Sadhu Kavonoi Shavanadi Sutta Chitte Kori Udoi, that pure love for Krishna is eternally situated within the heart of the living being. It doesn't come from any other source. When the living entity hears about Krishna, then that love, that desire to render service to the Lord, to please the Lord, to satisfy his senses, that desire becomes naturally awakened. So, therefore, Srimad Bhagavatam should always be spoken in this way. Emphasis should never be given on impersonal aspect. And emphasis should never be given on a concession of worshiping the Lord in an impersonal aspect, even though it may be here. When taken within its own context, a Vaishnava, a devotee of the Lord, understands, that such concessions are not required for anyone who realizes or who understands or who hears or has had the opportunity to hear the glories of devotional service to the Lord, to speak of, to hear the glories of the name, form, qualities, and pastimes of the Lord, which is what Srila Vyasadeva has given in his message of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, therefore, Srila Prabhupada is in the same mood in his commentary of this verse. What does he emphasize? He emphasizes devotional service. He says that the Supreme Lord is the seer of all worlds, both material and transcendental. In other words, the Supreme Lord is the ultimate beneficiary and enjoyer of all worlds, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 529. 529, that's Bhoktaram Jagatapasam Savaloka Maheshwaram Suridam Savabhutanam Gyatamam Shantamichati. Right? One should know the Supreme Lord, Krishna, to be the Lord of all the planets and demigods, the well-wisher of all living entities, the Supreme, and the friend and benefactor of all, the Lord of all the planets and demigods. Anyone who knows the Lord in terms of this position, he attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. Suridam Sarvabhutanam. He's the friend of all living entities. Krishna is a person. So, again and again and again, we spoke of yesterday, or 2 days ago, we were speaking about this particular reference about Krishna being a person, how the gopis, the devotees in Vrindavan, their meditation is simply on satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord. They know what is pleasing to Krishna. They know that Krishna is calling them in the dead of the night to come. This was mentioned yesterday in yesterday's commentary when I came in towards the end of the class. Chaitamayi, she was reading from the commentary. She mentioned that according to the Bhagavat school, the Lord's rasa dancing is the smiling face of the Lord. So she was mentioning this point, and I was thinking that yes, right, the rasa dance is the smiling face of the Lord, because the Lord was most pleased by the service rendered by the gopis. The gopis demonstrated by their selfless service that they were ready to sacrifice anything to please Krishna's senses. They never thought in any way, when they were leaving their homes, leaving their relatives, facing social criticism, going against the Vedic injunctions, facing the criticism of their family members. No, in their hearts, when they heard the sounds of Krishna's flute from the forest, and in their hearts, they were only thinking of Krishna's pleasure, Krishna's senses. And therefore, they entered into the forest with that thought in mind. And when they entered in that total meditation, of course, some of the gopis, they were not able to leave. Some of them, they were obstructed. But they entered into deep meditation. Some of them even gave up their bodies in meditation on pleasing the Lord. But most of the gopis who achieved the association with the Lord in the forest, when they got to the forest, the Lord was saying, "Why have you come here? Why you've gone through such difficulty coming into this dangerous place? Don't you know the forest is a dangerous place? And don't you know it is better just simply to meditate on my form, to worship the deity form, and go back and serve?" And the gopis could not understand. Why have you done this to us? You've called us by the sound of your flute, and we've come, we've given up everything, we cannot go home. Krishna was speaking in this way, of course, and he was very pleased to see and the gopis were actually satisfying him by their response, by their reaction. They refused. They could not give up because they knew what Krishna wanted, and deeply within the core of their hearts. And therefore, when the Lord realized that the gopis would not leave, then he enjoyed with them in the forest and engaged in the rasa dance. And therefore, they sacrificed everything, and they were it's described that the Lord's smiling face, he was most pleased by the gopis, what they were actually, how they were actually serving him. So we gave the example when we were asked to give a comment yesterday. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains in his commentary that the gopis' means of serving and satisfying the senses of the Lord was so high, the highest method. Is considered. Lord Chaitanya himself spoke when speaking about the gopis. He said there is no higher method of worshipping and serving, rendering service to the Lord than that service which was rendered by the gopis. So, why? Because Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Yega tamam prapajate tam sataiva bhajamyaham. He says, as they surrender unto me, I will reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects and son of Prita. So Krishna, to whatever degree one serves the Lord, to whatever degree one wants to please the Lord reciprocates accordingly. But the gopi service was so high that Krishna said, I can't do it. I'm bankrupt. I cannot reciprocate with your love. It is the highest form of love. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains, he said, the reason why Krishna said this is because the gopis, they gave up their husbands, their children, family, society. They gave up their everything to come to see Krishna in the dead of the night and to satisfy him. Krishna said, you gave everyone up for me. He said, but I can't give up my mother. I can't give up my father. I can't give up my brother. I can't do what you've done. Therefore, I'm a debtor. I can't reciprocate sufficiently. Of course, Krishna can never give up his mother. How can he give up his mother? He has an eternal relationship with his mother. His eternal relationship with his brother. He said, I can't give them up. So therefore, I cannot fulfill my vow in Bhagavad Gita that I cannot reciprocate. Therefore, let your own glorious deeds be, as Krishna said, I cannot repay you for your service. Let your own glorious deeds be sufficient to satisfy you. So therefore, the love of the gopis and the selfless service and desire to please the senses of the Lord, that is glorified. And Srimad Bhagavatam certainly brings that to light, that this method of pleasing the Lord is the highest method of satisfying the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to render service in this way, according to this particular relationship with Krishna. And although the devotee is meditating on satisfying the senses of the Lord, we should never think that the Lord is, of course, He is Purusha, He is the supreme enjoyer, but the Lord is always transcendental, and satisfying the senses of the Lord is never in any way satisfying the lusty desires, or never should it be considered that the gopis had any form of lusty desire. When speaking about the loving affairs between the Lord and His devotees, this is the essence of, this is real love. There's no tinge. Prabhupada says, just like the love or lust of this material world is like iron, Whereas the love of the Krishna and the gopis is the real gold, is the most precious of metal. So there is no comparison. But because we are still tinged by material lust in the material world, we think the loving affairs of the Lord with His devotees, according to our own conception, we project that this is some form of material loving affairs. But no, it is the highest form of love. It is the highest method of pleasing the Lord. It is the highest form of gratifying the senses of the Lord. And the gopis and the devotees who please to satisfy the senses of the Lord becomes so satisfied by the devotee's desire to serve. The devotee, he never wants any satisfaction for himself. He never thinks of his own senses. He never thinks of his own pleasure. He never thinks that I'm doing this so that I can get pleasure from the Lord. His meditation, his absorption is simply what is the desire of the Lord. That is devotional service. Of course, that devotional service, even if it's only for a moment, that can eradicate lusty desires from within the core of the heart. That type of devotional service is the type of devotional service that we should aspire to come in contact when hearing the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. Even for a moment, if we could just simply think that my life, my existence, my entire existence from eternity is meant to exclusively be as an offering to satisfy the senses of the Supreme Lord, never to think of myself. That is the highest form of self-fulfillment, is when Krishna can be pleased by my activities. And Prabhupada was actually quoting this verse, Atakpun Biyadvija Sheshta Vahanashram Vibhagasha Svanushtatasya Dhamasya Sangsiri Haritoshanam. That the highest perfection of all of one's activities, according to one's occupational engagements and orders of life, is to please the Supreme Lord Hari. That is perfection. That is Dharma. That is Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan Dharma means to capture, even for a moment, within the core of our heart, that my existence is meant for pleasing the Lord. Even if it means that I have to suffer. Even if it means that my pleasure will not be fulfilled. When a devotee actually thinks like this, even for a moment, the Lord becomes so pleased. Devotional service begins by such a thought. What can I do to satisfy the senses of the Lord? What can I do? Well, how can I please Him? And of course, and with respect to the other topic that we were going to speak about, which I was requested to speak about today, this is the kind of meditation that when we were first introduced to Krishna consciousness, at least myself in the early 70s, or devotees who came to the Krishna consciousness movement during Srila Prabhupada's manifest presence, Srila Prabhupada would speak the message of Srimad Bhagavatam in this same spirit of pleasing Krishna and pleasing Lord Chaitanya. And he would awaken by his association. He would fan that spark of that natural inclination, that desire that is there within our heart to want to voluntarily do something, even at one's own personal inconvenience, to please the Supreme Lord. And then, of course, the attitude that was gradually awakened within our hearts is when we saw how much Srila Prabhupada, who was Krishna's representative, was pleased to preach Krishna consciousness, to have his followers preach Krishna consciousness, and to distribute Krishna consciousness for the welfare of others. Anyone who came in contact with this movement during Srila Prabhupada's presence, there was no doubt in their mind what to do if you wanted to do something to please Prabhupada. Right, Jagadish Pandit? Jagadish Pandit knows. I remember when Jagadish Pandit came to the temple. He was a cello player, right?
That's right.
And you were a very, very expert cello player.
Yeah.
And you were going to play in a symphony.
Yeah.
That's right. And you were coming to the temple, and here there was so much resistance from your family.
Oh my God.
So much resistance. And he had to think how to get away from the family, because he would never be able to take the Krishna consciousness if he had to be with in the proximity of his family. What did he do? He went out and joined Radha Damodar.
Yeah.
Right?
But I traveled with Subal Maharaj, and then he left me off at the Washington D.C. temple, and eventually I joined
Radha Damodar. And what were you doing?
I was book distribution for nine years, every day.
Every day. That's right. Just see what Prabhupada done, what he did. That desire, it was so strong that anyone who came in contact with Krishna consciousness movement, it would awaken the desire to make personal sacrifice, to undergo personal inconvenience, and to please somebody, because that is our innate desire, innate propensity of the soul, is to please someone. And of course, Prabhupada became that person, so prominent in everyone's hearts, and he left it in such a way, he presented his message in such a way that was beyond a shadow of a doubt that if you wanted to please him, preach and distribute his books. Therefore, there was a revolution of thought and mind that, yes, pleasing Krishna. Of course, Srila Prabhupada established so many temples, he established deity worship, established farm communities, he established the Bhaktivedanta Institute, he established so many other forms of preaching, but he always gave emphasis and said, ultimately, if you want to please me in the highest way, that was his quote, ultimately, if you want to please me in the highest way, preach and distribute my books. Right?
Yeah.
That quote drove us mad, didn't it? It drove us completely mad. So much willingness to sacrifice, because Prabhupada had given so much. Prabhupada gave us an opportunity to understand who was Krishna. He gave us Krishna, and we wanted to please him, not just by gratifying his senses. Certainly there were devotees who had who were opportunities to render personal service to Srila Prabhupada, but Srila Prabhupada he was detached from these things. He would just accept it as a matter of duty, accept the service, personal service. He would accept anything that was offered to him, to give an opportunity to give a devotee an opportunity to render some service to him, and as a transparent via media, as Krishna's representative, he would accept it, somehow to awaken that desire in their heart to serve Krishna. But deep down, devotee, anyone who came in contact, they always knew that if he really wanted to do something to please Prabhupada, preach and distribute his books. And so, of course, that revolution was there, and it changed the hearts. And as the message of Srimad Bhagavatam explains, that anyone who once renders devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead will never be able to forget the lotus feet of the Lord. Never be able to forget that ecstasy again and again and again. Anyone who has once, even for a moment, made a resolute decision that I'm going to make voluntarily a sacrifice to do something that will please Krishna's devotee, then that desire, that service will never be forgotten by Krishna. Never be forgotten by Krishna. One's devotional service will begin. Ultimately, if we want to become fully satisfied, then we have to be engaged in unmotivated, uninterrupted service. And once it begins, then Krishna will help. He'll help awaken within the heart that desire to become free from motivation and to become situated in an uninterrupted platform of devotional service. That is the ideal. Unmotivated means without thinking of how I can be self-satisfied. Although the verse itself states, Savai pungsam paro damo yato bhakti radhoksache, the supreme occupation for all mankind is that by when men can render unmotivated, uninterrupted devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Yes, it must be unmotivated and uninterrupted, but this is the only way the self can become fully satisfied. And therefore, we begin to experience that, yes, so many things I do, but I'm still not fully self-satisfied. I'm still in so much anxiety, I'm still so much suffering. And Prabhupada speaks about that. He says, unfortunately, conditioned living entities, although suffering continually the threefold miseries in conditional life, are not very serious about going back to Godhead. It is due to their misguided way of living, complicated by sins and virtues. Some of them who are virtuous by deeds begin to reestablish the lost relation with the Lord. But they are not able to actually come to that platform of rendering personal service to the Lord. Our devotee is one who's actually understood that personal service to the Lord means pleasing the senses of the Lord, pleasing the devotee of the Lord, and therefore voluntarily doing something. I oftentimes, my own experience, forgive me for using my own example, but it was probably the most transformational experience in my life when I came to realize that I had to distribute Srila Prabhupada's books. I think many devotees already know the story, but for those who may have not heard it, I joined the movement in 1973. I started coming around the end of 72. I went out, book distribution from the first day I shaved my head. I was out on the streets in Providence, Rhode Island. Of course, I couldn't shave my head immediately. Tradas wouldn't let me shave. He made me live in the basement. And I used to come and beg, please let me shave my head. He said, no, you wait. But then finally when they let me shave my head, then that same day, they gave me this Boston Globe newspaper bag, filled it up with Reservoir of Pleasures, and I was down in Providence, Rhode Island, in downtown Providence, Rhode Island, by myself, having to convince people to take Reservoir of Pleasures and distribute. And it was very difficult for me. I had gone back and forth in distributing Srila Prabhupada's books over a course of 2 years, sometimes going out, sometimes I was brought back to the temple to do other services because it was so hard. But all the devotees in the temple, everything was geared towards, either going out in Harinam or distributing books. Joining Krishna consciousness meant that was it. That was except for a few devotees that would stay back and worship the deities. Service meant you either go out in Harinam or you go out and distribute books. And or sometimes, there were a few devotees back at the temple rendering some services, temple commander, And so I was brought back doing various services in the temple, and then to do that for some time, and then I would be sent out in book distribution, have a difficult time. I would even cry. Sometimes it would be so difficult, tears would come from my eyes, and having compassion, I would be brought back to the temple again and given some service, temple commander, treasurer, cook. And then I was back out in book distribution again. I remember in 1975, and I was traveling, doing traveling Sankirtan. And then one day, somehow, I got this realization, and it was really profound, it was very deep. I had this realization in my heart that I have a debt to Srila Prabhupada. I came to Krishna consciousness by coming in contact with his books. The only way I feel that I'm going to survive is I have to stay out and distribute Srila Prabhupada's books. I wasn't distributing many books, but I just made a vow. I just have to stay out and distribute books. And otherwise, if I don't, if I go back again, I don't think I'll make it as a devotee. I was thinking like that. So that day, I got a traveling Sankirtan leader, got a phone call from the temple president. The temple, I want to speak to Niranjana. I got on the phone with Niranjana. I had to go to the phone booth, wherever it was. I got on the phone with the temple president. The temple president said to me, we need a cook for the deities. And you're the only devotee who's second initiated who can come and replace the cook for the deities. You have to come back right away to the temple. And I said to him, you don't understand. I said, I just made a vow. I'm not going to survive. I'm not going to go back. I have to stay out. And of course, back in those days, if you didn't distribute too many books, then everything was always being weighed, you know. If you're not distributing enough books, then maybe you should come back and do something else. Book distribution is for those who are distributing a lot of books, and usually the criteria of somebody who would come back is if they weren't distributing a lot of books. And so both, I wasn't distributing a lot of books, and I was the only initiated Brahmin who could come and replace the cook. So I put up a fight. I said, no, you don't understand. I have to stay out and distribute books. But after some prolonged discussion, I was taught, I was trained in those days, and temple president is Prabhupada's representative. You know, even after submitting everything, if still he expresses his will, his determination, then I'll surrender. So I got on the bus and I went back to the temple. And I had to cook. Began right away, practically, I think. The next morning, I was in the kitchen, cooking the daily sweet, breakfast for the deities, breakfast for the devotees, the lunch offering, lunch for the devotees, the Mangal Artik sweets, and fruit offering. I think I was in the kitchen for 11 hours, something like that. 11 hours I was in the kitchen, from early in the morning to somewhere late in the afternoon. And somehow I got up early and I chanted my rounds before going into the kitchen. And the temple president told me, he said, after you finish your duties in the kitchen, you should go out and hurry now. And I can't remember, I might have been the only one back at the temple who played Mridanga also. But yeah, that was another thing. The way I learned Mridanga, the temple president, he taught me the beat, tini tini ta teo tanakate ditya ditya da. And he gave me the mridanga, he said, you play it. And I couldn't do it, so he took the mridanga again. He played tini tini ta teo tanakate ditya ditya da. And then he gave it back to me until I would finally be able to do the mantra and to play the beat. Then he took the mridanga back and just showed me again one more time to make sure that I did it properly. And then he took the mridanga, he threw it in my lap and said, okay, take out the Harinam party. And that same day, with my tini tini ta teo danakate ditya ditya da, I took out the Harinam party, and that's how I learned how to play mridanga. But anyways, this is a different temple president, who at this time told me after I finished cooking to go out. He didn't tell me to take out Harinam, but he asked me to join the Harinam. So, I was thinking that temple president brought me back to the temple to cook. So I'm doing all my duties cooking, and therefore, after I finished my cooking in the late afternoon, instead of going out in Harinam, I was a little disobedient. And I used to, in the morning when we'd go down to the kitchen, I would bring my book distribution clothes and I would hide them in that little room outside the kitchen in the basement. And after I finished cooking in the kitchen, I'd change my clothes down there and I'd grab some books and I'd go out to Harvard Square every day and distribute books for 2 hours and come back in the evening. And as I told you, book distribution for me was very difficult. It was very hard. And Harvard Square was the most difficult place to distribute books. Most difficult. I mean, usually when we went out distributing books locally from Boston, we would go out to Mattapan, the shopping centers, we'd go out to Natick, or we'd go to the shopping centers. But if you go to Harvard Square, it was one place you didn't go, because the people were just so puffed up. But I knew that I only have 2 hours. If I go off some place far, I'm going to take so much time traveling. I just have to go to the closest place and just grit my teeth and just tolerate it and just go out. And I made a vow. Prabhupada wants me to do this. And so every day, I would do my duties in the kitchen, I would change my clothes in that back basement room, and I'd sneak out the back door, and the temple president thought that I was going out in Harinam, but he never knew that I was sneaking out and going book distribution. And I'd go to Harvard Square. And then one day on Harvard Square, I had an experience like I never had, where I had the realization that Prabhupada was pleased. Because the taste for distributing his books was something for 2 years I suffered, I cried, it was so hard, but somehow that I got a taste. It was so blissful. I was just so happy. So happy. And I was realizing, it's like, this is what Prabhupada's talking about, that if you make some sacrifice, you make some vow, make some commitment, do something, that even though it's difficult, but think about somebody else's pleasure, what to speak of a pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada, think about his pleasure before yours, make the sacrifice. Then the process is joyful. And that conviction that Prabhupada was pleased was just left no doubt in my mind. And then I went out every day. And the temple president, he used to see me. And it was so blissful. And he was thinking, boy, you're really getting some bliss from cooking for Radha Gopi Vallabha. And I never told him what I was doing. I didn't tell him that was, actually, I was going out and sneaking out a book. I would, of course, cooking for Radha Gopi Vallabha, it's also service, pleasing the senses of the Supreme Lord. I don't want to in any way diminish it. But it should be done in the same spirit. Gopi Vallabha is a person. It should be done in the same spirit that I'm tolerating the inconveniences, tolerating the cold, I'm tolerating the schedule, the time. The Prabhupada says in worshipping the deities, the two most important things are cleanliness and punctuality. So we still have to develop the same mood of personal sacrifice for pleasing somebody else's senses in worshipping the deities. It's still, devotional service means make sacrifice to please someone else's senses. But in this particular experience I had that, I just felt that Prabhupada wanted me to distribute his books. So the temple president, after some time, he saw I was so blissful and he found out what I was doing. So I want you to know this was only a 3-week period that I was cooking for the deities back in the temple. After 3 weeks, he could see, just how blissful I was from distributing books. He said, forget it. We'll replace you in the kitchen. He said, here's the keys to the van. Here's this devotee, here's that devotee, that devotee. Fill up your van, go out and distribute books. And that was it. I was gone. So, anyways, I guess it's a story that I tell. It was a realization I got. Prabhupada's pleasure was certainly a profound experience, but that's if you want to please Prabhupada. If we actually understand his mood, understand his commentaries, his purports, his lectures, we hear his lectures, we hear, that's what he really wanted. The devotees to make some personal sacrifice. And Prabhupada speaks about it right here in the commentary. He just speaks about the misguided living entities who live a life complicated by sins and virtues. And then he said, somehow or other, one must try to reestablish one's forgotten relation with the Lord if one at all desires to gain real happiness in life and to reclaim his natural, unfettered condition. So, Prabhupada is, of course, this whole commentary is a preaching commentary that somehow or other, that those who have forgotten that life, human life, or the nature of the living entity, is to voluntarily or render some service for the pleasure of the Lord. For those who have forgotten that, then one should actually be given the opportunity to once again regain that forgotten relationship with Krishna and to awaken that natural desire to render service or engage in some activity which will be pleasing to the Lord and what to speak of pleasing to the devotees of the Lord. So, once that has been awakened within the heart, then one's spiritual life is begun. In this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution, and a little advancement in this path will protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Once actually having come in contact with devotional service, the devotee has begun his path, his journey back home, back to Godhead. Krishna being a person, a personality, who is conscious, who is always looking out for the welfare of his devotees, who's always understanding of the desires of the living entities within the hearts of the, he knows what is going on within the heart. He's always awake, he's always attentive. Even when it appears that the Lord is not present and not reciprocating, still the Lord never forgets any service rendered by the devotee of the Lord. Never forgets. So much evidence is given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, how the Lord is captured by even the smallest amount of devotional service rendered, even for a moment. So, because he's a person, he will help that living entity to reestablish his lost relationship with him, and will guide him from within the heart, and will send to him the opportunities to continuously cleanse his heart from material impediments and obstacles which prevent him, which obstruct him from coming to the platform of pure unalloyed devotional service. So, certainly devotional service means voluntary. It cannot be forced. That voluntary spirit has to be awakened to the desire that I want to do this. Krishna, he will not force us. We may have to suffer, and we may by force come to realize that I don't want to suffer anymore. That may be forced upon us, because suffering is forced upon us due to our forgetfulness and by turning away from the Lord. But to become relieved from suffering, this is not the ideal platform of devotional service. The devotee knows that the real method to become relieved from suffering is to please the Lord. Krishna Bhakti Nishkama Atayeva Shanta Bhukti Mukti Siddhikami Sakaliya Shanta. That even those who are muktis, those who desire to become freed from suffering, those who want sense enjoyment, those who want mystic yoga perfections, they still have some impure desires within the heart. Therefore, they'll never be peaceful. There will always be some suffering. They can't have real peace. Whereas only a devotee who is only thinking of Krishna's pleasure, he can be real peaceful. Devotee become fully satisfied. Why? Because devotee is voluntarily serving the satisfying the senses of the Lord and pleasing the Lord and his devotees. So that voluntary spirit has to be awakened within the heart. Therefore, sometimes we don't know what's going to stand over for us. This, please Krishna, please Krishna, please. No, they'll show us, they'll point us in the direction, but at some point we have to take our own voluntary decision to move in that direction. Although the example is given that sometimes Krishna drags his devotee by the hair back home, back to Godhead. Still, dragging means that he's leaving us with the opportunity to see that there's no choice. I must make this choice. Because choice is always going to be there. We always have. The conditioned soul will relentlessly who doesn't understand that, or is so attached to the material world, he'll always make the wrong choice and will always lead to more suffering. But a devotee who's once experienced what the right choice brought, he realizes, no, this is what Krishna is doing to me now. He's putting me in this position where I know this is the choice I have to make. And I have to move. I have to move. I have to actually take the initiative myself. Because Krishna's given me that freedom to take the initiative myself. That's eternal. That's an eternal, God-given, inherent quality of the soul, is choice. So I have to take the initiative myself to make that choice. I want to do something to please Krishna. If we make that choice, then Krishna will help us. That is that's the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's actually the message of this verse. Unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service unto the Supreme Lord, the seer of both the transcendental and the material worlds. And we already explained, this is the objective. Although the verse goes on to explain, she should remember or meditate upon the universal form of the Lord at the end of his prescribed duties. That is not a requirement for anyone who has understood the full message or the full import of Srimad Bhagavatam. One should instead meditate on rendering service to the Lord in his personal form, most personal form, in his personal features, and by voluntarily performing those activities which are pleasing to him. All right. Stop here. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki.